A veteran referee, someone who has worked courtside for Federer, Djokovic, and Nadal at this exact tournament, just said he has never seen anything like what Alex Eala's fans did in Dubai. And a top 4 player in the world backed him up on record. The only question now is whether any of it was actually wrong. Eala is 20 years old. She arrived in Dubai ranked 47th in the world, while 18 of the top 20 players on the planet were also in the draw. The aviation club was selling out for her. On-ticket sales jumped 48% year-on-year during the Women's Week. Jessica Pegula could hear the roaring from her hotel room. That does not happen. Not for a player ranked 47th. Not unless something has fundamentally shifted. Not just in a player's game, but in the entire culture surrounding the sport. Something had shifted. Before we get into what her fans actually did in that venue and why it's splitting the tennis world down the middle, you need to hear what it sounded like from inside.
On court 6, hundreds didn't manage to get in. They were, in fact, quite rowdy at times, told to be quiet. So there has just been just a lot of interest in this.
That is not a tennis crowd. That is something closer to a stadium rock concert during the final encore. And Coco Gauff had already felt the full weight of it before she even stepped on court for her own match. She walked off after a brutal 2-hour, 18-minute grind against Elise Mertens, looked into a crowd that had zero interest in her victory, and apologized to her opponent's fans before her own match was even finished. She told them she was sorry for making them wait for Eala. Let that land for a second. A professional player who just won a 2-hour match apologized to the crowd for winning too slowly. That is the atmosphere we are talking about, and it hadn't even hit its peak yet. February 19th, 2026. Dubai Duty-Free Tennis Championships. Round of 16, Alex Eala versus Simona Halep. On paper, it looks like a routine third-round match. A 20-year-old ranked 47th against a seasoned Romanian veteran ranked 32nd in the world, net a player with a Dubai semifinal already on her resume. What happened inside the Aviation Club Tennis Center that afternoon was not routine, not even a little. From the very first game, the stands were overwhelmed. Filipino flags in every section, handmade signs, coordinated chanting, and a noise level so extreme that Dubai's own official tournament coverage described it as Beatlemania reborn. Every Eala winner triggered an explosion. Every Kirstia unforced error got cheered. Every pause between points was flooded with chanting loud enough that the umpire had to step in repeatedly just to restore the basic conditions required for a professional tennis match to be played. The umpire couldn't control it. Quiet placards, the kind used at Eala's matches in Abu Dhabi the week before, did not work either. It reportedly took someone physically holding a microphone and making a direct public address to get any crowd control at all. But think about what that means at a WTA 1000 event. Think about the standard these tournaments are supposed to uphold. Eala won 7-5, 6-4. Her fans celebrated like she had just lifted a Grand Slam trophy. And Kirstia said nothing. On the surface, you might read that silence as sportsmanship, but here's what makes it something else entirely. Just weeks earlier, at the Australian Open, Kirstia had filed a formal public complaint about Naomi Osaka being too vocally expressive between points. More internal player noise. Something that had absolutely nothing to do with the crowd. She found that unacceptable enough to say it on record, openly, with her name attached. Then she walked into Dubai, into coordinated chanting mid-rally, into a crowd cheering her service errors, into a match where the umpire was visibly losing the room, and she said nothing. That is not sportsmanship. That is calculation. A player who will publicly call out another player for grunting too loud chose silence when Eala's fan base was involved. Because she knew, everyone in that building knew, that speaking out against this crowd, against this much national pride, against this scale of passionate support, would cost her far more than staying quiet ever could. The fact that she made that calculation tells you everything about how intense the pressure around these matches had become. The Tennis Gazette didn't stay quiet. Their assessment after the Kirstia match was direct and unambiguous. Eala's fans went too far. The specific violations were cheering missed first serves, celebrating unforced errors, and making noise while points were actively still being played. These are not minor etiquette slip-ups. In professional tennis, cheering a missed first serve is considered one of the most disrespectful things a crowd can do. It tells the player, and everyone in the arena, that you are not rooting for your player's brilliance. You are rooting against the opponent's ability to function. But here is where the story becomes more complicated and more human. A large portion of Eala's fan base had never watched professional tennis before Dubai. She is the first Filipino player to ever reach this level of the sport. For many of the supporters who flew in, who filled that venue, who bought those tickets, this was among their first live professional tennis experiences. The WTA's own Philippine event earlier in the year had posted Instagram content explaining what a hard court is, how the scoring system works, what the 5 most common shots are, because the fan base genuinely needed that foundation. They were that new to the sport. Cheering a missed serve doesn't feel wrong to someone who has watched football and basketball their entire life. An opponent's mistake is cause for celebration in those sports. It is instinct. It is not malice, but instinct and malice both look exactly the same from the other side of the net. That distinction, innocent intent, real disruption, is precisely what Coco Gauff navigated, and then confirmed publicly. Before their quarterfinal, Gauff had already told the press she was looking forward to the atmosphere and called Eala's fans great for tennis. That is not naivety. And that is a player who had watched every earlier round, studied what happened, and made a tactical decision before she ever walked onto court. Her strategy during the match was to absorb the crowd noise, pretend it was for her, use it as fuel instead of fighting it. She won 6-0, 6-2 in 67 minutes. But in her post-match press conference, she said this. Read that slowly. Gauff is not praising the crowd's behavior. She is confirming, on record, entirely unprompted, that she received better treatment than the players before her. She is a top 4 player in the world, and she is telling you, without being asked, that the conduct the Tennis Gazette criticized was real, that it was visible, and that it was significant enough to stick in her memory and come out in a press conference. That is Eala's fans being blamed for disrupting other players' matches at Dubai, confirmed by the most credible possible source in the room, delivered in the most restrained, diplomatic way imaginable. Now here's the part that almost no one picked up on. The man who built Alex Eala, whose academy has shaped everything she is as a tennis player, is Rafael Nadal. She has trained at the Rafa Nadal Academy in Mallorca for years. In late 2025, after Nadal's retirement in November 2024, he returned to a tennis court for the very first time, not for an exhibition, not for a media event, but for a private practice session with Eala. She described it as physically demanding despite him having been entirely off court for a full year. That is the level of investment his academy has placed in her. And that is the name attached to what Dubai just witnessed. A veteran Dubai-based tennis referee, speaking to Khaleej Times, he's placed Eala's crowd effect into direct comparison with Nadal's legacy at this same venue. He had officiated matches involving Federer, Djokovic, Nadal, and Agassi at the Aviation Club. All of them full houses, all of them historic occasions. He had seen what the greatest players in the history of the sport produced inside that arena. He said Eala's matches were a fundamentally different experience, a different atmosphere entirely. Unlike anything those legends had ever generated at the Aviation Club. He's never said that about anyone. Until now. That word, burden, is the one worth sitting with, because Eala herself is already managing something that most players her age never have to think about. She arrived in Dubai ranked 47th. She left with a guaranteed seed at all 4 Grand Slams inside the top 32. The crowd gave her energy, and she said so openly. She also made it clear she would compete just as hard without them. But the question of whether this level of support, this scale of passionate, partisan, sunny, overwhelming crowd presence eventually creates complications for her career, for tournament organizers, for the players across the net from her, is not going away. Dubai saw a 48% year-on-year jump in ticket sales during the Women's Week. The referee described the crowd management demands as beyond anything he had experienced in his career. That is not a problem you solve with a quiet placard. There is a line in sport between crowd energy and crowd disruption. Between passionate and actively harmful, between an atmosphere that lifts a match and behavior that compromises its integrity. That line got crossed in Dubai. The evidence is documented. The witnesses are credible, and they include a world top 4 player and a veteran referee with decades of experience at the highest level. Goff confirmed it. The Tennis Gazette named it. The referee placed it in historical context alongside the greatest crowds the sport has ever seen, and said Eala's crowd was different. And the silence from the player most directly affected, Kirstia, still speaks louder than any post-match statement ever could. Eala did not cause this. She has handled the attention with consistency, and nothing she has done on court has invited disrespect toward her opponents. But the conversation is happening whether anyone wants it to or not. Year-end, it is only going to grow louder as she climbs. If you want coverage that goes past the scoreline, past the celebrations and the highlight reels, and into what actually happened, why it matters, and what it means for where this sport is heading, subscribe right now. Hit the bell. Share this with anyone who thinks they already know the full Dubai story. Because they probably don't.